Hello everybody and welcome back to the CVRcade talk show. We've got a special edition today following up from the massive success that was MotoGP Killenly talking all things team cognition and CVRcade World Cup racing. Today, Casey, the entire community loves you. There was one time we put out a post on Facebook saying, if you left your jersey in the wash and you had to join a different team, they all said, you know what, I'd like to race with Casey Schumm. What's that like?
Yeah, I appreciate that from my competitors and from you. I've definitely had a lot of discussions with guys about forming teams, and right now I'm playing it solo a little bit. I mean, I'm part of Team Experimental. Christian and I race a little bit together, and there's a little connection with some other guys from past stuff. Jeff Rooney's still a part of our team. As a whole, but on Cade, he's racing with some other teams, and Frank and I have a history together. But I'm really kind of humbled by the fact that everybody looks at me in that way. I try to race in a positive way. I try to work with anybody that I can that's going to. I mean, it's a selfish kind of working with people, but if I work with people, they will usually return that favor. So any opportunity I get to work with anybody that's in my favor, I'm going to do that.
That was going to be my next question because is it a cognitive play in order to improve your racing ability? Because you know that being liked often leads to better results than being, like Velocity Vixen have a reputation for blocking with Ryan. Team Cycling Hub have a reputation for blocking. Are you racing saying, you know what, I'm not going to block because it actually increases my likelihood of winning?
Yeah, I don't necessarily say I won't block, but it's something I will use very sparingly because of the long-term ramifications it could have to that of kind of you think of it in other video games where you kind of build up loyalties with people. You can get close with a faction within a game or something like that, but one bad move can knock you down like 5 levels where it takes 3 weeks or 4 weeks to gain that reputation back. So you only want to play dirty when it's something critical on the line, time to get across that line. So, we'll see how tomorrow goes, but that could play into things. But I think people are less likely to react that way to me because I usually won't do that to them. I'll try to positively beat them by using my legs as opposed to like backing them up with a brake check or something like that.
Now, Casey, when I think the CVR World Cup, I think Casey Schumm. Like, I remember you from the very beginning being like the poster boy for this whole endeavor that's been going on. I mean, seeing you in Los Angeles up against Lionel Sanders, up against Adam Silverman, up against like insane athletes. And that's not saying you're not insane too, but like on a purely strength level, these guys were probably above you. Yet you were out there like top 3, duking it out. You've got the brains, you've got everything going for you when it comes to this virtual racing. What's it been like to be on this journey from Roanoke to across Europe, and now CVR has its own platform?
Yeah, it's funny you bring up Roanoke because that's really where it all started, and that was even before it was called CVR, and it was really the first in-person live event of any sort. With the online racing like this. And I first, I'm thankful for the opportunity to be involved in that over time. I mean, really the Roanoke invitation stemmed from my friendship and my teammate with Frank Garcia. So that was an awesome experience for me to get to prove what I was capable of. I'm not just a random Cat 4 racer. There's a little more to me than that. I don't apply that outside that much. But then, yeah, to go to LA and to get to race against people, being a little bit of a triathlete myself, like Lionel Sanders. I mean, it's really just been an awesome experience. I've been very fortunate to be healthy and at my peak when it really mattered to do those races. So honestly, I didn't go into those races with the expectations of where I ended up. So, but yeah, I mean, it's been a crazy ride the last 4 years with the indoor cycling. My life has improved because of it. My fitness has improved. When I started indoor cycling, my FTP was under 300. I'm around 350 now. And I was a strong cyclist before I raced indoors. So, it's come a long way.
What's it like to not have FTP matter anymore? You were known as one of the Swift AllStars, but now on Cade, FTP is like, FT what?
So I'll have a different opinion than most, probably, because Other than when I'm racing at that elite platform level, I my advantage is usually my strength, right? Like my physical strength. So most of the racing I've done prior to CVR that was kind of casual racing, I do well because I can overpower my opponent. I typically have that advantage. I play the games well. I do tactics well, but I usually have a strength advantage over a majority of my opponents. There's definitely some elite level racers out there that are stronger than me, and I have to use tactics against those, and I've learned that. But CVR, I cannot rely on my strength to overpower people. So it's completely tactics. You have to be, there's less room for error. Like I can make a mistake in heads up racing, and usually my legs can overcome that. Usually, in CVR, that's not so much the case. And I mean, I've even found that there's almost points in different kinds of racing where you almost have a disadvantage being stronger, and that's hard to understand until you do it a little bit. But there's times where I actually feel like I have a disadvantage because I'm one of the more fit riders.
I think there are swings and roundabouts because from being on Saturday, for example, being a fit rider in terms of pure fitness is going to be such a major key element. Being able to just produce efforts upon efforts across 3 hours of racing. And yes, I do agree. Sometimes maybe being up there, you get perhaps penalized in the sprints. I don't really know. It's been a while since I raced. But Casey, what's it like? Because your fitness journey when you were racing the on Swift, I know, has improved tremendously. But now on Cade, I mean, every time I talk to you, you're like, that's a new PB 20 minutes. That's a new PB 20 minutes, and that's a new PB 20 minutes.
Yeah, the races are a little bit shorter, so it favors setting some of those short term power PRs, like hitting hard for 20 25 minutes. I don't really do that in any of the other racing and workouts that I do, so it sometimes is a little biased to getting some PRs in that, but yeah, I do think you're right for the endurance perspective. Saturday endurance will be key, but you got to get through the first hour. Like some people, I go through it in my head, like, do you go into it with a little bit of I need to be prepared to race 3 hours? And it's like, no, it's the same thing that I talked to with my son in baseball in high school. Like you have to, when you get into like a bracket type or a tournament type thing, you have to play every game to win. And at the end of that game, if you're out of pitching, if you've completely exhausted all your players, you reassess for the next game. But there isn't a next game if you don't get through the first one. So you have to play everyone to win. So the fitter riders, I think, could rise to the top in hour 2 and hour 3. But in hour 1, you have to overcome the guys that can crush it for an hour. They may be dead after an hour, but you have to overcome that. So, but yeah, and back to my journey, Jesper, I want to touch on that because a lot of people don't know that. Most of the people I cycle with don't know me pre-cycling. You know, I'm just over 40 years old. When I turned 30 years old, I smoked a pack a day. I weighed over 200 pounds. I weigh about 160 now. I haven't touched a cigarette in 10 years. So I like to throw that out there. Like prior to turning 30 years old, I did nothing athletic in my life. I wasn't a high school athlete. I wasn't a runner as a kid. None of that. It was really, you know, my family and my life circumstances that I wanted to do something to improve myself for my family. So my fitness journey and my cycling journey is still driven by being healthy and setting a good example for my friends and family and helping others more than it is about me being competitive. So I try to keep that focus as much as possible.
It's a fantastic story, really, that I don't think a lot of people know. I think when they look at you and your dominance, they're like, well, he's a purebred talent. I mean, some people, they just, you know, it's always that kid at school that no matter what sport they do, they just excel at it. And I think a lot of people assume you fall into the same mold. But Casey, Saturday, the first race, you're in the group of death. I mean, Peter Kastrup, Sebastian Kuhn, Kale Laguna. What's the strategy? What's the plan going into that? Because that is hands down the toughest omnium of the qualifiers.
Yeah, you just kind of got to race every race and deal with the cards the way they're dealt and react to the strategies of the other riders. I honestly think it was bad for me to watch the replay yesterday. You know, I enjoyed Turkey with my family and completely ignored CVR. And I got home last night and I watched the replay and I'm like, oh, to race Sebastian. Like, so Sebastian's going to beat me. Like in my head, I'm going through Sebastian's going to beat me, and that's not to take anything away from the other two in my zone. I'm like Sebastian's going to beat me, so I have to beat Kayla and Peter, and like that's a little bit overwhelming. Like if I looked back at history, like history would say consistently, I can probably pull that off most of the time. I might have the odds at if you were going off history, but like there's more motivation for these people now. I feel like I'm always motivated, like regardless of whether it's a big race or not. Like I'm just one of those stubborn people. So I will always go hard to win, where I feel like if there's a little extra motivation behind some of these people, I'm honestly worried. There is no gimme, and especially not in my zone right now.
And if you do qualify on through, I mean, there is MotoGP Kelly, who I don't believe is actually racing this Saturday, unfortunately, due to conflict scheduling. But there's also Quinton, there's Timothy, there's Jennifer. So you got to do all this racing across 3 Omniums. And when you look at the tracks, Casey, I mean, there's Dark Matter Velo in the semifinals. There's Summit Islands in the final. There's Mountain Bike by Jesper. Where do they land on the scale of what you like and don't like in terms of the racing?
Yeah, I've got to go back and look at the tracks. I need to get my controller out, and I'm gonna ride. I'm gonna use the controller and ride some tracks today, and write down corner speeds and get a feel for them. So I haven't really digested exactly all of the layouts. There was a couple things that I saw on the Facebook post that were interesting to me that I had in my head, like, oh, I think I kind of know what I can do on this track or that track as far as fast places to attack, how the power ups stack up. I think there's some of my opponents, and I don't want to call anybody out specifically because I don't want to offend anybody, and they know who they are, and they would probably admit this too. But there's some opponents that are very strong but suffer from the tactics as far as the hazardous tracks and lane changes and wrecking and things like that. So I go in with a little bit of confidence that maybe I'm better than them at those tracks, and you can't screw up on any of them. So hopefully I can stay ahead of a few people when we get to the more technical things. But you hear me say it all the time in stream. It's like, don't wreck, don't wreck, don't wreck. Like there's not an opportunity for a mistake and to come back from it with the opponents that are out there right now.
I remember you initially when you because we were back beta testing way back in the days. You hated crashing, didn't you? Like you were a big opponent of the crashing.
Yeah. What I struggled with crashing, and part of it was I needed to change the way I viewed it a little bit, but also some of it was game frustration too, with it being in beta. But it comes down to I want to push the edge, and I want to execute better than my opponent. So I would push every corner right to the hairy edge of speed, and I would know what every one of those speed things are. And it's happening so fast that it was hard to get through a race without making that mistake, because I always wanted to race on the ragged edge. And what I learned as I could usually, have an advantage that way because most people were overly cautious. But once I figured out is some people found that balance of pushing of how to race it. And it's kind of a race car mentality. It's go slower to go faster on some of the more technical tracks. Give up a couple kph in a risky corner because 30-40% of the time somebody else is going to get overly aggressive and you can push them into a mistake. So you kind of have to adjust to that. And then there were some nuances in the game early that overlapping wheels and sliding in corners would produce wrecks that didn't feel right. And I use that term as something that Frank would always say, like, did it feel right? And a lot of those things have been improved in the game. So I think most of the accidents we have on track now would be what I would categorize as they feel right now. It's an appropriate time to wreck, and it's consistent. Where in the early beta days, some of that was a little bit hit and miss, and that was just the growing pains of a new game. So yeah.
I'm fascinated to hear how much time you actually spent thinking about strategies and thinking about the game, because whenever we have a conversation, you're like, I could use this power up here, but everyone uses it like this. But if I use it like this, it's better. Like you just walk around thinking, oh, light bulb moment, I could do this.
Yeah, something that's a little different in Cade is you have to think in multiple dimensions a little bit. And this is something we learned early with the power-ups. And I don't know if it was intentional at the beginning, but I think it's been left that way intentionally because we've gotten creative with it. Is the and I'm going to give away some information here to maybe some newer writers, but I think the true competitive writers already have figured this out. But like stacking power-ups, and some power-ups are better to use at the exact same time, and some are better to use one and then the other right behind it. And where you use those on track, like it's more effective to use it maybe on, I can do better on this hill because I don't have to slow down for a corner before that hill versus that hill. So all of those things, and what I'm always looking for is there that little nugget that no one's figured out yet, or not everyone's figured out yet, and where can you maximize the advantage of that power up? So whatever the advantage is of like the weight lifted, dropping your weight doesn't just make you go uphill faster. It makes you do other things on the flat part of the course. It changes your physics. And that's what's great about Cade, is it has those realistic physics. So if I were to literally get on my bike weighing 10 or 15 kilograms less or whatever that is, it's a significant difference. Like, you go find 100-pound man, which is essentially what that turns me into, and put my legs under them in a sprint, like, they can accelerate really fast. So is it better to use that on the hill, or is it better to use that to accelerate? Or, and those are things that aren't super secret to anybody now, but those are the things you're always looking at. Is that's the part I like about it, is the physics to try to figure out and play with how all those things stack together.
But you say it's not a secret. I am sure that at least half the listeners right now are like, wait, what did he just say? And then they like rewind the tape and they're like, weight lifted on the flats? I never knew. Thank you, Casey Schumm, and they will definitely use that against you on Saturday. But we need a prediction here, Casey. You can't say yourself, of course. Who do you think is going to run away with the $3,000 here on Saturday?
So I'm bummed to hear that Moti's out. I think Moti knows the game really well, but I don't know that he would have been my pick. I struggle between a lot of guys, but Tim always seems to come to the front. And Sebastian, the unknown with Sebastian is he's only really raced one race a day. We don't really know what. I know Sebastian from longer than just CVRcade, so I know Sebastian's an athlete. He's one of the guys like Tim and I that are probably more fit than the average person. So I think he'll have the endurance, and I really struggle with. I'm kind of going through this in my head because I really don't know. A lot of it really stacks up to who they're up against. But I think Sebastian and Tim will both be in the final. They would be the two that I would put the most money on to be in the final. And then it's going to come down to endurance. And I honestly think Tim has got the advantage there simply because he's been racing multiple zones many times over the last 3-4 weeks and been successful at it.
Well, there you have it, everybody. Casey Schumm's predictions and some insight. I hope you took advantage of this, took down some notes, and next time you race on the platform, you try out some of these tips and tricks. So if you want to share the love for Casey, you can do so in the comment section below or over on the CVRcade Riders Forum. Thank you so much, Casey. I wish you the best of luck here on Saturday, and hopefully next time you're back on, it's perhaps as bracketed session CVRcade champion and $3,000 richer.
Oh, thanks, Jesper. I appreciate it. And remember, regardless of the money, if you're on your bike and you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. So biggest thing is have fun. Thanks for having me, Jesper.